Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics with a really fun and practical project. We're now moving into the cooler days where we start to make casseroles again, and the Gypsy Quilter, who has made the bowl cozies, both the small, the large, now has something called the Casserole Dish Hot Pad. I want to emphasize this is not a cozy that you would put in the microwave. This is not microwavable, but we will jump into that in just a bit. But it really serves the same idea of keeping our surface from being burnt from a hot casserole that's come right out of the oven, and to help keep our casserole warm while it's waiting to be served. I love that. And just like our bowl cozies, this is completely reversible. And I love this fabric. Oh my gosh, these fabrics are from the Scandi Christmas collection, Macauer, UK. I absolutely love that. And those little flecks of gold that you're seeing are metallic. Such a special, very European look. It's made, I think, designed in London, UK for United Kingdom. I love that. So be sure to pick up the Scandi fabrics if these speak to your heart, of course. What I love about this project too is it's fat quarter friendly. It only took 2 fat quarters to make the project, one for one side and one for the other. And of course, you want to be using the Casserole Dish Hot Pad. It's basically kind of a batting kit. And one of the things they mention when they say 3 count, I want to make sure that we're aware there's 3 pieces in there. I'll show you what those look like. And it makes 1 casserole caddy. We want to make sure that people aren't confused thinking that they're going to be getting 3 completed casserole hot pads, but rather 1. And it's just that the 3 count means there's 3 pieces included. And what makes this different than our bowl cozy, and is the reason why this cannot be put in the microwave, is this reflective material that's included, along with 2 pieces of that wonderful soft batting. Those are included as well. So once you have your fabric selected, our instructions that are on the top of our batting kit here are having us cut our fabric to a very precise size of 15 3/4 by 20. I would really love to encourage you to increase those to maybe 16.5 by maybe where that fold is, maybe 21. It's really nice to be able to layer up the fabrics, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. We'll put 1 piece of our, just our batting aside. We'll have 1 piece of the batting down. Our reflective material will be next, and then we'll put our fabric right on top. I love that we can really oversize this at this point, and we'll be able to trim that down. So we cut ours just a little bit bigger. Now they don't specifically designate in their instructions of whether this reflective material is up or down. My thought is that it would be kind of up, but you know, whether you want to have that down, I think it really is going to have a nice insulating component to it, no matter how you do it. And of course, if it's completely reversible, you know, is this the right side or the wrong side? There really is no right or wrong side since this is reversible. But if you're concerned about the silver showing through maybe a light colored fabric, maybe you want to put the darker fabric here, or maybe just turn this so that this side is up and on the back side of your light colored fabric. Your choice. Now what we need to do is basically attach these things together and do a little bit of quilting. What we did on ours, and I'll just show you what we did, is we just layered that up. And we started, and we just kind of built some diagonal, kind of these beautiful diamond shapes. And how we did that is I took my 2.5 inch by 24.5 inch creative grid ruler, and that's been just great for not only cutting jelly roll strips for other projects, but when I want to be able to draw lines for quilting like this, this is my go-to. I think it's a really nice interval. I feel like that is a really nice distance to draw lines that I know I'll be just stitching down. And the width of the ruler, I just go the full width of that 2.5, and I draw again, just like this, and I keep coming over this way, and then I turn. One thing that we discovered when we went to just sew that together is there was some shifting, and we felt there was a need to secure those things together. You could use basting spray if you wanted. I think Wonder Pins was one of the things that we'd love to recommend, because once you have your grid drawn, let's pretend like this wasn't quilted yet, you know that right in the middle there, you're not going to be having your presser foot there. you can just be inserting a wonder pin there, and it's a good way to, if you don't want to be using any basting spray, I understand that. It's a really nice way to be able to pin that all together. And then at that point, you'll just be stitching down your drawn lines. And of course, be sure to use a pen like the friction pen and test that. Be sure to test that on your material before you use it, just a scrap piece, that it will truly iron away. So let me just show you. I think my iron's warm enough to show you that. As you saw, I just drew those lines. I'm running out of space already. But let me just show you on my fabric here, my light colored fabric, they iron away beautifully. As I've experienced on darker fabrics, when I use a friction pen, they can leave a little bit of a haze. And I know that friction pens now are coming out in an array of color. So use whatever color you feel would be the least noticeable when you try to iron that away if you do draw on those lines. Maybe you're super experienced at free motion quilting and you're not even going to be drawing any lines. That's not me, and I have to use the crutch of the drawn lines. Once we've done that, you can see that we did flip that over, and we just kind of use the shape of our batting to cut that out. Notice, I want to see this from the overhead camera, that even with us kind of trying to clamp everything together, there's a little bit of shifting. I would really recommend that at this point, before we go to our next step, that you're just cutting that away and just getting a nice clean edge right there, because what we're going to do next is actually sew those darts closed. And I like to have a very clear visibility of what's to come next. And what I mean by that, before I cut the rest so that you can see what I'm talking about, is our next step is to lay this right side together and sew right here and close that dart. I can see that edge, but if I don't trim that fabric away, when I try to lay this together, I don't really know where that batting is. Notice how that batting is here, but it's over there. I can't see that unless I trim the fabric away. So that step that's in our pattern, I'd like to encourage you to scoot that up and do that now. And we are able to see that. And so we can make sure that we're getting that dart nice and secured and grabbing both sides of that batting. So I'm going to finish that up real quick. And by the way, for your other piece of your batting and your fabric, you're going to do the exact same steps. Of course, you don't have the insulating portion, so you just have the batting and the fabric, but we did the same thing. We drew the lines and we quilted. Again, I encourage you to go in there and go ahead and trim that out so that when you close the darts on this piece, which will be done the exact same way, you can see what you're doing. I'm going to go to the sewing machine. I want you to see me close that. You can just stack that on top of itself, or if you feel inclined that you want to pin. Clover also, you've seen me use these pins. In fact, let me grab them. These are my fine patchwork pins. When I'm doing piecing, this is my best friend. When I'm dealing with a lot of bulk, a lot of batting right now, it's very easy to bend these pins. That's not their mission. They're for patchwork piecing. Here, this is called fine. These are extra fine. They're longer, sturdier, still that amazing glass head on them, but they are meant to deal with this bulk. They're stronger, thicker in gauge, and longer. They're meant for this mission. So if you do want to pin that, these are the pins I'd like to encourage you to, and don't use your patchwork pins on this project. Let's go ahead and take that to our machine, and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. And we'd be doing the same thing on every single one of those darts. There isn't really a reason that you can't prepare them all at this point and take them all to the machine at the same time and complete this step. And of course, you'll be doing the exact same thing with your other piece, that's the batting, and then the other fabric. So we can just pin them all, go to the machine. We'll just do one together, and then I'll be completing the other 7, the other 3 here and the other 4 here. And then when we come back, we'll be able to take you to the next step of finishing up our casserole hot pad. So I've closed all of my darts, and one of the other things I'd like to encourage you to do, in fact I pressed those off camera, is what we're going to be doing now is placing these with the right sides together. As you can imagine, we need to sew that together and leave an opening and turn it through. It's easier if we have our seams pressed open. I sewed a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You could certainly sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance. It's not going to make the bowl hot pad too small for your casserole. We just want to have something where we're able to press that seam open here, both on this, and it's much bulkier, of course, on this one as it's got the additional layer. But it does make it easier for us now to place them right side together, and I can very easily see where they meet. And this is where my wonder clips are going to be my friend. I'm going to be sewing from this side, so I'll have the clear side down, and we're just going to be clipping all the way around. And you can just decide where you want that opening to be. You know, maybe we'll decide that we want to have our opening, you know, certainly not on a curve. Don't do a curve. Let's do a long straight side, maybe over here, where this is going to be the edge that we turn everything through. Make a bigger opening than you think you should. This is a lot of bulk coming through there. I am the one that's guilty of making it too short, and then I can barely get the thing turned out. I'm going to keep clipping, and that way it'll be all ready to go, because I'm going to clip very frequently, and I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance too. There's so much bulk going on that I think a 1/4 inch isn't going to be enough. We're going to use this thing, we're going to wash this thing, it's going to get cheese on it and sauce on it, and we want to be able to wash this thing and use it again. So I'll keep clipping, and when we are at the sewing machine, I will plan on using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I will start here, making sure that I reinforce really well, come all the way around, and we're going to stop right there and reinforce again. And then really before we even turn that through, one of the things they recommend here is potentially kind of trimming down that seam allowance, but I'm going to leave that seam allowance open for this opening, and maybe trim out just a little bit of the batting. But let me go ahead and get that clipped, and I'll see you over at the sewing machine. So before I get started sewing, knowing I have this much bulk, one of the things I did here is I changed my needle to be the Schmetz, the jeans needle. This is size 100/16. Normally I'm sewing with an 80/12 needle. This is much bulkier to handle this. I think this BERNINA is so strong. 80/12 would do the job, but the 100 this is what it's made for, bulk. One of the things we also discovered when we were making our sample is this batting kind of wanted to walk. I'm going to use a tool today. This is the Clover, I think it's called a Hold It Precision Stiletto. I could certainly use this side of it, or this side that kind of has this push capability that's going to kind of anchor that, so I don't allow my presser foot to push my batting along. So I'll go ahead and get started with my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Again, reinforce very well in the beginning. And when you get to these points, go ahead and stop, needle down, and pivot, so that way you're kind of following that slight curve of our casserole hot pad. Let's get started. Okay, let's see how we've done. I am not used to sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So if you've sewed any areas that are maybe a little shallow of a half, if it's not by that much, I'd go with it, right? Now, one of the things they mentioned in the instruction, and they call it grading, grade the seams to reduce the bulk and clip the curves as needed. So that's where these beefier scissors, you know, if you've watched our videos, I love my Kai. This again, the patchwork, the fine patchwork pins, the extra fine patchwork pins are not the right tool for the mission, and neither is the Kai right now. These beefier scissors are really meant for this. I'm gonna just cut this down to 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, kind of all the way around, except not the opening. That's already going to be challenging with the 1/2 inch seam allowance, or with the bulk, I should say. But once we get over here, we can make a decision if we want to try to grade out the batting, make it just a little less bulky. But let me go ahead and I'll get that trimmed up, and then let's go come back together and we can see what we think about this opening, if it's easy enough to turn as is, or if we want to kind of get in there and start grading away at some of that batting. Okay, let's look at that opening. We talked about that. If you're going to trim that away, try to reduce the bulk, this is probably the right time to do it because it's now up and exposed to us. It's easier to get to, and we can more easily separate that versus turning it through and then deciding. So we know in the end, in order to close this thing, after we turn it through, that this edge is going to be turned down, and really, this one's not a big deal. I can imagine myself turning that down by 1/2 inch here. It's definitely going to be the other side. That's going to be my problem if I do have a problem. I don't know that it's unmanageable, but I do see that's a lot of bulk right there. So if you were going to cut that away, we have this quilted, right? So we can't do, it maybe isn't going to look pretty, and maybe not necessarily even, because I don't want to necessarily unstitch that, but even that little bit did help. So this is kind of one of those things in crafting and making, I'm like, make it work. It's kind of in that ballpark, that category. So let's turn that down, and I think that's going to be okay. Even if you wanted to trim away just a little bit, trim just a touch of that so that they're stacked on top of each other. Okay, one of the other things they mentioned, not just grading, but maybe even clipping into the seams just a touch. I shouldn't say seams, curves, because it's this point that kind of gather on these. So you might want to clip in just a bit. If you've braided the seam down to a 1/4 inch, be careful that you don't clip too close and potentially, catch your seam allowance there. So they're saying just kind of snip in. This is a chore for any pair of scissors. Be real cautious here. We're just going to do that. All right, let's turn that through. So we can just reach in there, kind of grab the opposite corner or adjacent corner. Let's just kind of start working it through. This is a lot of bulk. Oh my goodness. In Idaho, while I'm arm wrestling this thing out, in Idaho, we have 4 distinct seasons. I remember I went to college in California for a couple years. It was kind of summer all the time, or it was the rainy season. And I love that up here in North Idaho and in those colder states, that there's certain things I do different times of the year. I don't make casseroles in the middle of summer typically, but this is very distinctly a time of the year that I look forward to. And I use recipes that I don't use at other times of the year. So if you live in those cold weather states, you know what I'm talking about. That you eat differently, even more of those comfort foods, I guess I'd call them. So when you have a big project like this casserole hot pad, it's never a problem to really get the bulk of it smoothed out with your hand. That's though, I really love to still get in there with the clover point turner again with that nice beautiful curve and get in those corners with the idea of it just getting out, just flattening it out even that much more, so that when we do take that to the machine, that it's laying as flat as it can, so it's easier for my machine to get through the bulk. This is again where having that size 100 denim needle in your machine is really helpful. And of course, go slower. This is a lot of bulk for any machine to get through. Now, we talked about the opening. We know this is our easier side and that we didn't grade that seam down at all. So if you did sew, or if you decide to sew with a 1/2 inch like I did, be sure you're turning that down to the quarter, excuse me, to the half, and trying to do the same here. And you can see why we really wanted to grade that while it was wrong side out, because now it's more difficult to get into that. But we'll go ahead and try to press that. And this is where our Wonder Clips are going to help us hold everything together. Just like that. Do your best to kind of feather that out. That kind of finesse thing again, and we'll Wonder Clip it. Now you might want to consider, even though this is the only opening, you might want to consider, like I kind of roll these seams so that they're as flat as can be. Wonder Clips can be helpful for that as well, so that that seam doesn't have this bulk kind of caving into itself. You can see that. I'm like, nope. I'm going to smooth that out. I kind of almost roll my fingers, and I use that Wonder Clip to keep that as flat as I can so that my machine can get through that bulk and it's not rolling inside and you're kind of taking a tuck. So I'm going to continue clipping, obviously clipping my opening very well, and then the rest of it as well. I will take that to the sewing machine knowing that we graded everything down to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Means that I'm going to now do a top stitch that will not only close the opening but really kind of give it a finished look, as you're seeing all the way around, of an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, I'll see you at the sewing machine in just a bit. Okay, so now we're at the machine and we're just going to sew our 1/8 inch seam allowance all the way around. I think we did it. I think we made a casserole hot pad here. I love it. How fun is this? And reversible. So let's test it out. Let's put in our casserole dish here. How fantastic is that? I love that. You know, no more, when I take casseroles out of the oven, I've got like 4 hot pads if I can find them, and they're not always the same height, and this is so much better. I'm really excited and pretty. How fun is that? So this is a really fun project, as you can see, can be done in just a couple hours. Amazing for presentation. It's practical. And wouldn't this be amazing? Maybe you show up to a potluck. Maybe someone's just moved into the home and you give them the whole thing. They get to keep the casserole, the dish, and then amazing, this kind of beautiful, decorative and practical, hot pad. So thanks for giving me a part of your day. I always love showing you projects that I know you'd love to make. They're practical to make and obviously fun to give as gifts as well. So thank you again. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already done that. And I'll see you soon in another video from Shabby Fabrics.